Hello.
It's finally nice to see you and meet you. You know, we've chatted
Yeah.
a little bit before, but never really on video. So we're finally doing it.
Yes. I'm excited.
Very much so, yeah.
Takes more to get excited after awakening, but I'm excited.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. Yeah.
So tell me about your awakening. Let's start there.
All right. Well, it actually, I don't know if it's usual or not for people, but it started with a weed trip. So there was a lot of marijuana involved, 1.5 cookies. Let me tell you, nobody needs 1.5 cookies, but it led to some very profound realizations. So I'm grateful for that. Basically, I found myself in the mind of God before creation. And it was like a video played out in front of my mind. And it was very emotional all at the same time. Like I was feeling what God was feeling at that time. So basically it started in darkness, but not darkness as in no light, but emotional darkness. So it was like, how to describe this? Like there was something, but it wasn't self-aware. And all of a sudden it became self-aware. And then it started realizing, you know, that it's basically it. There is nothing else. It is everything. It is infinity itself. And it was all alone. And that led to the realization basically that for me, that there's this being, the universe, which I never considered before, and that it's basically God. At least that's how I would describe it. Now, this is coming from a non-believer, right? Sorry, I'm just going to.
Yeah, it reminds me of a few psychedelic experiences I had on LSD.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when I was because there's different ways you can access this stuff, and there's like mystical experiences, there's psychedelic glimpses, there's satori, there's slips into non-dual awareness, there's the shift we talk about, the permanent shift. But yeah, it's funny because I was like a super Buddhist guy, and I was having like Judeo-Christian experiences. It was like the way I put it was Lucifer's heartbreak.
Right.
That it's like a crushing. It's like a million breakups. It's like worse than that. It's a dark realization that from a certain angle for me anyway. When I had that, I was about 26 when I took some really strong acid once, and had a similar experience where it was very clear to me that I was before time even now, and I had multiple experiences like that, but that the universe is a dream, things like that. That was very clear to me all along, and that there's a oneness that was very clear to me all along. But the crushing, almost non-human emotion of that abject aloneness, even now, it's like a dark realization, and I wept harder than I'd ever wept, and I thought that the weeping would kill me. And I call that Lucifer's heartbreak. And that was about age 26. So that was 2 years after my Kundalini awakening and a year before liberation. So that was like my version of like the catalyzed dark night leading to the big enlightenment liberation type experience. But yeah, go on. I didn't mean to cut you off though. It rang so true and reminded me of some of the experiences I had before that it interjected itself.
It felt very much the same for me. Like it started with darkness, emotional darkness, and all of a sudden there was this thought. So it started with one thought: I'm alone, and that there was great pain associated with it.
Yeah, and it's not a good feeling. It's that's why I call it Lucifer's heartbreak. It's
exactly.
Never like experienced that emotion fully until then, and it's almost like the dark side of awakening. And again, that was only a year before liberation itself, which doesn't feel like that at all, by the way, thankfully. Right. But yeah, but go on. I know I'm throwing my own experiences at you here.
No, it's okay.
I wanted to hear yours. I keep interjecting.
So basically it started with this feeling of I'm all alone. And then there was another thought, and that was there is no love. And all of a sudden, as that thought came on, there was a new thought that said, well, there is love because I just created it now. And then it went from sadness to great happiness. And then it started kind of like splitting apart. So then there was another feeling of this is eternity, this is all there is. And then there was another thought, this is eternity, this is all there is, this is awesome. And it kind of went through like ups and downs and ups and downs, and it was very almost bipolar. I know it sounds funny, but that's kind of how it was. And it led me to create my own set of 12 commandments that were true for me as a person. Wow. So when you say you had like a Judeo-Christian experience, this was true for me, you know?
Like I had multiple things like that too. Yeah, like all along. And I don't know if it's just the culture we're raised in and those are the stories that are fresh in our mind or how that works, but that's how it expressed itself almost every step of the way. So like when I was 24, I had a Kundalini awakening, and after the Kundalini awakening fully manifested itself, I entered into like an astral samadhi type experience.
Oh, cool.
And I saw this like angelic type bridge type structure, looked like an alien angelic fractal monorail structure, but in my mind, oh, it's a bridge. Like that's the silver cord that connects. Okay, yeah. And but like that must have been what Jacob saw, was my next thought. Like, oh, Jacob called this a ladder, and I'm seeing it as a bridge. And it's like, what a, and I felt when I came back from that, I felt like I had met God, and like I was like a character in the Bible now. The feeling like, oh, my character in the Bible, like real time. This is trippy, you know. But it was, but I wasn't on anything when I had that experience. That was all spontaneous, energetic, like endogenous DMT was probably part of that, you know.
Cool.
But a lot of other stuff. But then, yeah, like my actual awakening was on Father's Day, 2017, the year of the rooster, which is a symbol of Jesus and Lucifer both, and of awakening.
Oh, really?
Father's Day, the Father and I am one, that type of thing. And it's like, it's weird to have those types of experiences when you're like a Buddhist, you know. But yeah, it's cool that you had your two experiences were like in one experience, it kind of flowed from one into the others. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
What were your 12 commandments that you came
so I kind of lost sight of it. Like I wrote them down, but I can no longer find the paper. But the first one was truth is important, but it's important not to hurt people with the truth. So kindness is more important. So then two things came out of that. Is like there is evidence, and that's important, and compassion, and that's even more important. So to live life right, we need to go by two principles, or I personally need to go by two principles, and that's evidence and compassion. And that really led to my realization of, yeah, okay, I can see how I could have been too harsh, you know, with some people, trying to make my point clear, even though it may have hurt their feelings, but that was never intended. But it could have happened. So now I'm much more aware of how I may influence other people and choose compassion more than even the truth. So it's things like that. And, you know, it changed me fundamentally as a person. So I went from a complete non-believer. I was raised as an atheist, coming from post-communist Slovakia, you know, like religion was not allowed at all. And there was nothing like, you know, spirituality or anything like that, to all of a sudden being like, oh my goodness, like I feel like I understand what this is. And like you said, like I could be the next Buddha or Jesus or any kind of prophet, right? And it was like all of a sudden all of this knowledge was revealed to me, like it was imparted to me, and I felt so honored that, you know, I was technically one of the chosen ones, right? And at the same time with it, it came so much depth of emotion and sadness, and like you said, it was like
bittersweet.
Lucifer showing me his pain, right?
Yeah,
but with
exactly.
that pain came so much good, and there's the evolution. So basically now when Christians say, and good will always win, I see that, because, you know, as it started to unfold, if there was something bad, there was another concept that was created to make up for it, right? Or to make it good. And so that concept completely rings true with me now, that no matter what happened, it will all turn towards good. Now, maybe
it's
not
all
in my
working out for the greater whole, but maybe not for the individual person's story. Yeah,
exactly. Right.
The way the Buddhists might put it is, this is the best possible world for all beings considered.
Yes. In
other words, it's not perfect for anyone, but overall, this is the only way it could have been done to create a perfect world.
Right. And there was another thing that I saw, right? So when it was in that state of mind before creation, there was just infinity, and it was nothing more than thoughts and feelings. And it was going from one feeling to another thought, to another feeling, to another thought. And it was all going back and forth, back and forth. And all of a sudden it exploded. because it was going crazy in its mind. Like you have this being that's all powerful, that has the greatest cognitive capacity, processing capacity, and there is nothing else but itself, right? So what do you do? Well, you burst and you create others, because that stabilizes you, right? So all of a sudden that need that, you know, you're alone and there need to be others, that need has been satisfied. So that is my understanding now. Like it burst so that we could all be here, and we are all it. We're all a part of it. We're all a fractal of it, right? So we are all divine. We're all sacred. And that realization in my mind was like, well, we're not these like damaged, you know, beings that are just here to suffer in hell. It's like, no, this is so much larger than that, right?
Exactly.
Like we are the divinity itself. We're just here to learn our own lessons, to grow and to evolve. And that was just so beautiful to me, you know, like I never considered that at all. I never saw myself or anybody else as divine. And I was like, what is this divinity that they speak of, right? And all of a sudden, I felt like I understood. And it was so beautiful, because now going from a perspective of there is no miracles to everything is a miracle. We are a miracle. You are a miracle. You know, everybody
is a
universe
miracle. Is a miracle.
Exactly, right? And it goes so much further than just people, right? It's like, you know, you have galaxies, and then you have potentially universes, different universes, right? And it's huge, and it keeps expanding.
Even as one cell is just jam-packed with cities of miracle of happening, you know, it's like infinite scale, functionally infinite. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was brought up with science, right? Like science was something that was worthwhile, that you went into, that you did, and that was the only way to find out the truth. And now I see like, well, it is a way to find out the truth, but the truth is already there. It's already set.
Yeah.
And we're just rediscovering it basically for wherever
we
are
at.
That. Right?
So we are the truth. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it was like all of my perspective shifted. It was like, we know nothing, to let's explore, to you can know basically like the basics of everything and then just keep exploring. So religion on one hand and science on the other, and they actually make so much sense together, right?
Every religion suddenly makes sense. Every science suddenly makes sense. It's like, it's so funny that like as a seeker, I was trying to pick like which one got it right, you know? And now I see like they all had a piece of the like of the understanding. Exactly. It was just kind of cloaked in the mistranslations of seekers that came after it, and the dualistic mind's warped sense of things and reinterpreting it and translating it. But really, you know, all these realizations people have had over millennia, this is all this is. It's just the accumulated stories of thousands of sages over time having glimpses, having awakenings, having mystical experiences. And it's cool to finally see all that and to be able to appreciate every religion, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm glad you say that, because that's exactly what happened to me. So I went from an atheist to being a pantheist, right? Like I see truth in all religions, and I accept them all because I see that they're founded in the truth. And yes, it may have been misinterpreted here and there by people who didn't quite see the big picture, but in its basics, it is all true, right? It is all correct. And there should never be anything else but the truth, right? That's all there is. And we're living in, I mean, like all of, I would call it creation now, or existence or reality, right? That is the truth that there is. Now, it may work in a different way than we imagined, or, you know, but it is there and we're all a part of it. So we are fractals of God. You are 100%, you know, you are 100% divine. Now you may, all of you is divine, right? Like there's not a single part of you that is not.
Right.
Now we are not the 100% of God, but 100% of us is God. And that's just such a beautiful realization, you know, like it changed the way I thought about everything. And now I consider things that I never considered before. And I consider them so much more important, you know, so everything about me shifted fundamentally. Like everything that I used to focus on and do, I used to be a workaholic. Like I would work myself until I basically almost died, you know. And there was
after awakening, there's almost it's not laziness, it's not procrastination, it's just there's no pressure, there's no delusion that you have to do something quick.
Right? There's no need. It's already done.
You already are it. You already are perfection. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So it's like that. And now I have shifted focus to people. it's important to talk to people, to understand people, to talk to them about their pains, and things like that. So it has actually shifted my focus from being a researcher to now I want to start being a life coach or a therapist or a counselor, things
Yeah,
like that,
exactly.
right? So yeah, it has definitely had profound impact on me and my life, and it has made it better. I'm
Beautiful.
happier as a person. Um, excuse me, and yeah, and that means a lot because like I have depression. I suffer from major depression and have for a long, long time. And so things like very deep, profound sadness, even suicidal ideology, that's something that I'm very familiar with. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, it's been replaced, but with there's absolutely no reason for it. That's totally irrational, like you
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
perfection. Like you may feel like you're not good enough, but that's just
Right.
simply not true. Like you are
It's
perfection
probably
itself.
just biological at that point instead of psychological hang-ups of story time. It's like there's just something biological that needs attending to. Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, there's two sides to that, It's like I would say that upon awakening, suffering ended here, and also depression ended here, but there's still sadness, and I still take supplements that I would have taken for depression.
Mhm.
Like I take 5-HTP and
That's
things like
awesome.
that to boost serotonin, and yeah. But I know what you mean. I when I, especially as a seeker, I went through tremendous suffering and depression. I was on antidepressants and things, and strong doses of it, and yeah, it wasn't fun.
No, no, it's
But it's
crazy.
certainly easier after waking. It doesn't mean all your problems are solved. Not that there's any problems, but it's not like $1 million is put in your bank account and your biology suddenly changes to someone totally different genetics or something like that. Like there's still, the energetic impressions are wiped clean and yet kind of trickle back in a certain way. But there's genetic component, epigenetic component, biological components to this. Genes are responsible for producing certain proteins that then produce certain enzymes that then produce certain neurotransmitters that some people have in abundance and other people the body just doesn't create as much, and there might be an evolutionary advantage to being slightly unsatisfied and seeking out more things.
Sure.
But for our life, yeah, it becomes more important to get exercise and sunlight and take supplements and have a
Absolutely.
diet that helps your mood and things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's still there's still the biological component to all this. It's not that everything is just hunky dory afterwards, even though it's much easier, and it really is much uh, more relieving, and you're happier and more peaceful. But there's still moments of riding these waves even now. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, I'm so glad you said all of that because I came to that same realization basically because it started with I was depressed and I didn't know what to do with it, right? And I'm in psychology. So I basically almost have a PhD in psychology. My status is PhD, ABD, so all but dissertation. Um, and I found myself not knowing where to turn, not knowing what to do because
Exactly.
all of a sudden I was being given these feelings that were just so overwhelming and I didn't know what to do. And then I was given this as if a key to happiness, right? It shifted my perspective. And with that perspective came other things. So I would have different thoughts and they would calm me down. So now that I was calmed down, my endocrinology would change, my hormones would change, right?
Yeah.
And I felt like it started to rewrite my brain. And I feel that's
Yeah,
still happening and
exactly.
it still will happen for a long time to
Definitely.
come, right?
Definitely. And
And
that's a
I can
huge part of it, the endocrine glands. That I can't stress that enough. Yeah.
absolutely. So I kind of feel like I went from, suffering to all of a sudden shifting towards health and happiness.
Yeah,
And that
totally.
was such a great spiritual gift. Like I couldn't be
Yeah,
more grateful for that. And so
definitely.
this all happened in about 6 years. And I just feel such huge, immense changes happening as a result. And I kind of feel like that's my calling. Like if I can show people a different perspective, if I can show
Yeah,
them that you can look at it this way or you can look at it this way and they're both equally true, which one makes you feel better, right?
exactly.
Which one do
Yeah,
you
it's kind
want
of
to
like a
believe?
cognitive behavioral therapy meets Byron Katie meets, yeah, this thing we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
absolutely.
right? Like cognitive behavioral therapy, as you say, is all about changing perspective, right? Cognitive restructuring.
Yeah.
Well, I was cognitively restructured right there and then. That's for absolute
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
exactly. And during my and I have a degree in psychology as well. But
Oh,
during
that's
my
awesome.
my yeah, during my Kundalini awakening at 24, I kind of just fell into bliss spontaneously, and the body started like moving, and my hands started going like this, and the breath, spontaneous cobra breath, ocean breath occurred. And then what happened next was the endocrine glands. I could feel one by one, I could feel like pressure inside, like almost like they had doubled
Yeah.
in size type of feeling. But these are ductless glands, so they don't store anything. It's immediately released into the bloodstream upon production. So one by one, from the bottom up, I felt these glands release the entirety of their neuroendocrine cocktails directly into my bloodstream that science probably hasn't even discovered a tenth of so far. And it was
Wow.
directly entering my bloodstream one by one as each one of these endocrine glands was having the pressure and just producing a lot of hormone from just who knows what each gland produces, a lot of different things for
Right.
sure. And it was producing pretty much everything, but it was so blissful. And then once it reached the top, and I wasn't on anything when this happened, and once it reached the top, I could feel the like endogenous DMT production. Once it hit the top, like, okay, now I'm very aware of the room around me. And then that launched me into an astral samadhi type experience where I had a mystical experience that was pretty much exactly like meeting God, and
Yeah.
taught me all about light. And it was kind of like, yeah, it's like going back in time. It's like time travel, because you go back to before the universe began and you realize it never did begin. Not really. This is all like God's daydream, if you will. This is all being imagined. And that imagination,
Absolutely.
that dream stuff is this luminous white light. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's like Bugs Bunny goes to heaven on a certain level. Even though I'm this hyper Buddhist intellectual, I'm Bugs Bunny goes to heaven on a certain level. Because once it launched me into that, it was like, yeah, it was like a tunnel of glowing white cloud with a light at the end of it. And I'm like, okay, sure. Sure it
I'm
is.
so glad that you mentioned the spontaneous movement, right? Because I had actually experienced something like that, and that was also before my awakening. Um, so I was given an invitation to join this spiritual practice called Falun Dafa. Now I had nothing, like no basic level of knowledge of any of it, basically. Like I kind of heard of Qigong, but I didn't really know anything much about it. So I decided, why not? I'm gonna go. And they basically did like a free 2 hour set of 5 Qigong exercises. And I do feel that I had a Kundalini awakening afterwards. And it was so strange because the second time I went, all of a sudden the music was playing and my body started moving. And I felt like I wasn't in control of that movement. Like I tried to
Yeah.
stop it and I couldn't. It was
And
so
the way,
powerful. I just kept
exactly,
going
the
back
way,
and
the way I
forth.
like to put that poetically is, well, it's not even poetic, but I say, we don't move the Kundalini moves us.
Absolutely. And you know, it scared me. Like it honestly scared me because all of a sudden I I felt before like, okay, this is me. I'm pretty, powerful being. I like my agency and everything I like to do as I say or whatever I will, right? To all of a sudden being put in a position where this is my body, but I'm not in control of it. Like things are happening and like my will is not strong enough to stop it, right? So it was in a way a very scary experience and it was very wondrous at the same time. It made me think of all different things. Like, so if it's not me that's moving, and what is it, right? And that's how I discovered Kundalini. So I had no basically nomenclature of
That's
any of
interesting.
these concepts or anything like that
Yeah.
before. And
And it's
then,
like I knew of that stuff before it happened. So when it happened, I knew what was happening. I was
oh, good for
fortunate enough
you.
to be kind of groomed for that, because I had been trying to enact a Kundalini awakening since about age 14, 15, 16.
Oh, wow.
And it kind of came online around age 16 in a way where I could very subtly feel it and try to raise it up through. And then it wasn't until age 24, 8 years later, that it finally happened. So I knew that these things could happen, but they never did like that. But then full blast, and I was going like this, and it even formed phonemes. I started saying sa, and then later I looked it up, and that's Sanskrit for the word breath, and it corresponds to this mudra. I thought, whoa.
Wow, that is incredible.
And then when I looked up my
Wow.
experience later, I'm like, oh my God, are these things even connected? And like it was all just right there. Like, yeah, this is all part of it. I'm like, oh wow. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
That's
So yeah, that might
amazing.
be scary if you hadn't known of that stuff, that it was possible, and that it was Kundalini that was doing it, and yeah, but obviously the energy work triggered it, and we say there's no method for awakening itself. However, I will say that I dedicated a big chunk of my life to just trying to move the energy and doing that type of work. So it definitely relates into these mystical experience type layers of the awakening process, at least. Yeah.
Well, if you haven't heard of it, I certainly very much recommend the Falun Dafa or Falun Gong. So there are technically two different things. One of them goes with like teachings and things like that. That's the Falun Dafa, and then there's the Falun Gong, which is basically the exercises of the Qigong, and that has made
So is
a
this
world
like
of difference for me.
Taoist internal alchemy type energy work?
Yes, and you're taught basically how to shift the energy within you and how to balance it.
Cool.
So it was very
Create a
powerful.
circuit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I definitely recommend that for everyone. I know it's technically forbidden in China, but not here. And so if anybody's interested, I recommend it.
Yeah, definitely send me a link in private message, and I'll try to include that link in the video description if we publish this in the future, for sure.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'd love to do that. Yeah. So there were just so many things, that happened that basically started with this great awakening. And it came as a result of suffering. So when they say that suffering is your greatest power to awaken, I find it's true. Personally, for me,
Yeah.
it was true.
And that's related to Kundalini too, and the dark night of the soul and all that stuff. I felt like I was very acutely aware of that the years leading to awakening, like maybe the 5 or 6 years before it. Like I knew that I was allowing myself to be consciously dragged through hell in order to arrive, and
Right.
it's weird to know that while you're doing it, type of thing, or to allow that. In a way, that's a type of surrender, but it's not. It's just like kind of really engaging with this really important work that's not physical and not based on the story of a person, but obviously this energetic, kind of astral component, if you will.
Mhm.
And I can't stress that enough, that this shift is an energetic shift. This isn't just something that happens in the biology or the brain activity. Those are side effects of this energetic shift. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what caused it. I just know that it happened to me.
Yeah.
And there was a very clear progression of everything that happened. And I'm so grateful that it did. I'm a completely different person. I'm so much happier. And just things are really working out for me.
That's
And
great.
I couldn't be happier. Yeah. It's
That's amazing.
been one of the greatest adventures of my life. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And, all of these things combined and considered, I definitely feel like it may not be for everyone, but the people who are lucky enough to go there, it will greatly benefit them.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because there's not everybody talks about that side of it, and I've experienced that too many times, of kind of going, either realizing you're before time now, and that you never left, and that you never would create a universe, not really, and yet you get to have your cake and eat it too, all within a dream, because this is perfect, right? You
Yeah.
didn't actually do anything, but you pretended to create a universe, and yet we can look around and go, oh wow, and enjoy it as if it's real, even though you would never do that to yourself. Isn't that interesting? And how many people, even amongst sages, I don't hear that very often. It's not that uncommon in my circles, but there's many sages who have no idea what we're talking about when we say, yeah, I went back before time, like, and experienced emotions as the lonely god, if you will, or the heartbroken Lucifer, that type of thing. And
In my
it's,
experience,
it's
you're the
cool to
only
hear that
person talking
expressed.
about it.
Ah.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody else talk about it.
Oh
Now,
wow.
I'm not
Yeah, it's pretty
necessarily very
rare.
well educated in any religious or spiritual scripts, so I can't necessarily say that they don't talk about it, but I've never heard it before.
Yeah, it was an experience I had. I don't remember hearing about it anywhere. I've heard other people experience this similarly that we have, but I don't recall ever reading that in a text anywhere. That's a good point. Yeah. And yet it's really interesting that I probably have met a handful of people that have had that particular experience of kind of going back before time, or realizing that even now you're before and after time, and that this whole thing was a great success, and this is a
Right.
victory dance from the middle, even though it loops back around. And this is a good way of explaining it,
Like the way
yeah.
I see it. And afterwards I started thinking about all of the, questions of cosmology and the universe and things like that. It's just like the universe was in a state or phase that was pure energy. And then it exploded and created material and space-time. And that's what we're in right now. But
I love
all
that
of it is
idea, though, that
still
it was a runaway train of thought and emotion looping and spinning. The way I always used to put it, as I say, it's like spinning light. But I like the way you put that, because it has the momentum of that intensity that leads to what we call the Big Bang. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And like when I realized that, like all of it is energy, and that energy is not just any energy, it's consciousness itself. Like I felt that, God was self-aware. So there's consciousness. So it kind of
I
went
like to call it
from,
awareness too. Yeah. Because you can see
right,
how in energy work, it's very obvious. Wherever you put your attention, the energy flows, right? That's what they always say in
absolutely.
the cliche anyway, where attention goes, energy flows. That's real. It's true, because the energy is the infinite attentional awareness of what we might call God. And that infinite attentional awareness of what we might call God is a type of white light that is hidden from view from mortal eyes, and yet
It's there.
supersedes and underlies as the fabric of reality everything that we see and experience.
Yeah. And, like in a way, when I started thinking about it, religion started making sense to me, like in a different way. And I know that my understanding goes very much against the doctrine. But for example, the way I understood it is like, so in that phase where it was all energy, that's God the Father. Now it exploded, and we're in the phase
The
that
firstborn,
is exactly the Son, right? The body of Christ.
Lucifer
And
or Christ, yeah, the same
sure,
being,
and
light.
all of it is the Holy Spirit, because it's consciousness, right? And
Yeah,
so all of that all of a sudden made sense, and I was like,
exactly.
wow, like I kind of
And
feel
this
like I get that. And
and it links into other religions too. Like in the Tao Te Ching, it says, "Whose child is this?"
oh, that's interesting, I didn't know that. Yeah. And it kind of makes me think of so many things. Like I became interested in quantum mechanics, for example. I took a
Yeah,
course on it,
exactly.
and it was fascinating. And then,
Yeah,
excuse me, just thinking about the possibility. So if I know how, or I feel that I know based on what I experienced, how the universe began, is it going to end? Is it ever going to end? Or is it just going to go back to, basically become self-aware? Okay, the underlying principle here is me. Everything that I see and experience, it all just comes down to me, and I am God, right? Basically, that was the thought. Then is it going to collapse and create,
yeah.
basically go
Big
back to
Bang,
the
Big
same
Crunch.
phase?
And I looked into it at one point as a seeker when I was having similar experiences, and it said that according to like really deep understanding of like Hinduism, it said a Big Bang and then a Big Crunch is called one day of Brahma, and it takes
Oh,
311 trillion years. And I thought, wow, that's in an ancient
wow.
text. Like, oh my, what?
Wow, I did not
One.
know
So it's like
that.
a,
That's
if you think
fascinating.
about the universe as the shape of, so it looks like this is the shape of the universe, but really it seems to be a torus, and the
Yeah,
torus
makes
is
sense.
so big that it only looks like it's expanding from our perspective. But the universe is much bigger, and it's a torus, and it's a moving field. And so a Big Bang, Big Crunch, Big Bang, Big Crunch, and one revolution of that, maybe it takes 311 trillion years, and it's like one day of God, one day of
Wow.
Brahma.
That is so cool. I never heard of that, but I totally appreciate that.
Yeah, and human
That-
civilization seems to go in a cycle too. So
Mhm.
we tend to become extremely advanced and united as a one world type structure, and then we fall back to the Stone Age, and that too happens about every 24,000 years.
And I'm so glad you said that, because there was actually one aspect of my experience that came at the very end. Um, so basically, all of these revelations were kind of shown to me, and I felt like I understood them. But there was one at the very end that played in my mind, but I wasn't quite able to grasp it. I grasped the basics though. And the basics of that was that we are connected to the stars and the stars affect us. And once we understand that, we understand consciousness.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and
that's
this is
all I know about it.
I would say this is a deeply held and deeply guarded Freemasonic secret, is that both things we just said are connected. In other words, you see all these old stone buildings like the pyramids of Giza, for example, and we still can't build one with our current technology and understanding because we're not there yet again. And this keeps happening. And you have to understand that when they built the pyramids with that advanced understanding, they also understood that human consciousness and civilization and the stars are connected in a deeply held, it's technically astrology, but not in the grocery store, oh, it's my horoscope way, but in a much deeper layer where the founders of the United States, for example, were Freemasons. They weren't traditional Christians, they were Freemasons who, when they would create certain buildings, they would wait for the stars to be in a certain configuration, and then they would, just like the pyramid. So there's this deep science. It's kind of like a druidic type experience that's kind of lost to the ages, yet there's a certain current of it that flows through certain secret societies and things, and they're also privy, I think, in the deepest levels to this deeply guarded secret that world civilization keeps restarting over and over again in a cycle, and that we have this remnant of the secrets of that golden age each time it goes around, even though we're like too dumb in a way to access it, we still have it. And we can't build a pyramid, but we know it wasn't made by aliens, if you will. It was made by free, non-slave, free stonemasons. And
I like that.
so the people who know how to use these giant monolithic stone structures and the science behind that are also the ones that understand the science of the stars and how that relates to this grand cycle. So yeah, all that's spot on and interconnected and a deeply held secret, I think.
I really believe that. And I do believe that there are cycles, and that, we've seen the rise and fall of civilizations many times on this earth before, and that it's
and
still
it explains
happening and will continue
everything.
to happen.
Yeah, it explains out of place artifacts. It
Yeah.
explains ancient alien stuff. It explains all these stone structures we can't recreate. And I also have a strange belief that is based in pure logic from my seeking days, but it seems to clear up the whole alien UFO thing pretty well. And that's that these so-called gray aliens are perhaps human beings from the future coming back to study themselves anthropologically and to epicyclically boost their own evolution, if you will. So
I've considered that. Like, what if, we're still evolving, right? At one point we will turn into a different, well, not turn into, but you know how it happens. A new species will arise from us, right? And why not them? Why couldn't it be them?
Yeah,
and why
they even say
that
back? If you ask an evolutionary anthropologist or biologist, well, what will we look like 100,000 years? Well, our heads will get bigger, our eyes will get bigger. Hey, wait a minute. And supposedly they had so the story goes, according to decent sources within the government, is supposedly when the Roswell crash happened, they dissected the bodies and found more evolved human organ systems, essentially. And the black was just a contact lens that can be peeled off, and underneath is a big human-looking eye. And this is just like a augmented reality contact lens that peels right off,
Well, I didn't hear that, but that sounds awesome.
Yeah, so that'd be interesting, and it kind of makes sense. Like people say things like, well, if there was time travel, there would be evidence of it since time immemorial. And like, yeah, there is.
Well, there is.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. We call it ancient alien. It's really like it could be humans from different points in the future coming back to check out its own history and its own its own mysteries of its own evolution and its own origins. And that's why they're interested in us to begin with. Why else would they be? Because it's us.
Right, or the pyramids on Mars, right? The
yeah,
human beings on Mars.
Yeah, exactly.
Who says that's not from another eon? When we were all all around, basically, right? Dominating our own solar system.
Exactly.
Yeah, why not?
And there's a lot of proof for that too, because not just because of the symmetry of the face on Mars and the Cydonia complex with the 5-sided pyramid and everything else, but there's no natural reason for there to be that much iron dust on the surface unless it was basically like skyscrapers and shit made of iron that then, because the atmosphere was lost. And then we have the moon, and the moon seems to be artificial and
Hmm.
seems to be
I
composed
forgot
of
that.
metal. And NASA flicked it with a bomb
Oh,
maybe 10
really?
years ago, and they measured what it did, and it rang like a bell as if it was hollow, and it freaked them out because it's a hollow metal artificial satellite that looks like it's made of rock because of all the eons of meteorites and things slamming into it. So it's encrusted with rock and meteorite debris, but it's just a very ancient artificial satellite. Most moons don't lock into the orbit like ours does, and they don't perfectly eclipse the local star, etc. Like, it's another well-kept secret that the moon is hollow and artificial.
Well,
And
if you have the link to that, I would love to see that, because I recently read an article that said that the moon has developed some kind of a wobble that hasn't been there before, and scientists can't explain it. But that would make sense with what you're saying. You know, maybe something is happening to it. Maybe if we did nuke it, maybe this is some kind of side effect that's happening
well,
later on.
it's like it could be that these time traveling humans created that, or that they use it as a type of kind of like we would use the International Space Station, but like
Yeah, yeah.
times a million, and how it affects the tides and the evolution of life. It's hard to say exactly what's going on, but it seems pretty obvious that like they found strange things on the moon too. Like they found like way more titanium than there should be, because it's probably made of titanium essentially, or some alloy of it. And that there's like 2 layers of metal, one
Oh,
darker and one lighter, and then on top of that the meteorite encrusted surface. And when supposedly the reason they faked one, according to one story anyway, the reason they faked the moon landing footage was because they actually went there and 2 UFOs showed up, type of deal. And like scared, and the astronauts were screaming and shitting their pants on national television. They couldn't have that, so they had to fake the footage instead, even though they did go there, type of deal. And
that would
so
make so much sense.
yeah, so the old grays that are us in the future shoot us off their lawn. They're like, no, 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 this is ours. Go away. And like, we haven't had an Apollo mission in a very long time. It's like NASA's afraid of the moon because it's spooky to them because of what they've experienced. There's even they even have code words for like seeing a UFO if you're on national television and at the time, and you say, Houston, I just saw Santa Claus. And then people at home go, oh, that's a cute joke. And it's like, well, that's a code word for, okay, I just saw a UFO, and I'm telling you now. And okay. So,
That's so funny, because I have actually seen what I call a UFO before.
oh yeah,
And so all of these reports and everything, I believe that, and I'm sure, there are some that are just something that is either natural or something that is man-made.
yeah.
But this one I could not quite explain. And I do like to reserve, the possibility that it may have been a UFO.
So usually they have these. Apparently, they have these. So first of all, let me just say that it's kind of funny because in like the radical non-duality community, they'll say things like "no aliens," right? And really, what they mean is like there's no other, right?
Right.
And this, what I'm saying, my little theory here, actually ties into that. It's like, so the question, "Are we alone in the universe?" becomes ridiculously hilarious, because first of all, you are alone, right, as the universe. So are we alone in the universe? Like, okay, you're already assuming there's a we. That's so precious and romantic. There's a we. Are we alone in the universe? Well, apparently not. Aw. But the other side of that is like, if this is us from the future, then we're still alone.
That's true. That's
Obviously, there
true.
probably are actual aliens, but like, why would they be so interested in us? Well, the ones that are probably us from the future.
Right.
And it usually these time machines, these time and space machines, um, probably have a cool to the touch gravity generating engine on them that bends space-time, but that's beside the point. But basically they're usually circles, right? And the man-made ones that reverse engineered this and couldn't quite pull it off tend to be triangles. So what did you see?
So it was at dusk, so it wasn't very visible in terms of like lights. There were no lights, and it was like a hemisphere, so kind of like a top hemisphere. And I thought maybe it's a parachute or something like that. And I was looking at it, but there was nothing hanging below it, and it was just this dark, maybe dark brown hemisphere that kind of kept going like this, and then went straight down. And I thought, nothing that I know goes straight down unless it's a helicopter, and there's no sound associated with it. And yeah, there's no lights, and legally you have to have lights if you're in an airplane or any kind of like aerial vehicle, right? Especially at dusk, it would need to have lights. There was no lights and no sound, and it went like this. I'm like, what the hell is that?
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, that's I thought so. Went on the internet, found another picture of it. I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I saw.
I always wanted to see one, you know. I always wanted to find Bigfoot or see a ghost or see a UFO or something, or be abducted by aliens. None of that ever happened, but I had all these mind-blowing mystical experiences and liberation and everything else.
Careful what you wish for. You know what aliens are known for, right?
Yeah. That's true. But you know, it would make sense, like why they're studying our biology and our reproduction and our genetics so thoroughly. It's because we're the cavemen and they're the anthropologists with the time machine.
True, but you know, there's also another possibility. Like in the Bible, it says that we're basically a created species, right? Yeah. That God made us, right?
Elohim, and there are angels. Plural. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there are angels and basically the same species that became demons, right? But they do not have the ability to procreate. And so there's this possibility of maybe they aren't us, maybe they're real, what we would call aliens, a different species distinct from us.
Yeah.
And they do not have the ability to procreate. But if they're trying to establish their own colonies and be able to kind of like become the authors of their own history, then if they can combine their DNA with our DNA and all of a sudden be able to procreate, then they become their own species, right?
There's one theory that these gray beings, for example, would be from the Sirius A and B star system, that they're amphibious, and that relates into Freemasonry as well. That's one side of the theory, but I personally do like the time travel idea. And if you think about it, imagine if human beings got so advanced that we started trying to make perfect versions of ourselves using only cloning, and then we no longer have the ability to reproduce like animals would, right? But that kind of explains it too, right? The whole idea of like, it's kind of like a genetic manipulation perfected and then slightly gone wrong beyond a certain point where now they can't even, so now they have to come back and influence themselves. Yeah, it's probably more complex than we can think about. However, I've noticed that using pure logic to think about it in terms of human beings that are time traveling, as crazy as that sounds, it actually solves every mystery with the whole alien idea, which is strange, you know, that it solves everything. Well, but yeah, I'm sure there's actual aliens too, you know. They don't think they would be that interested in us particularly, or especially obsessed with us like this one set of beings seems to be. But yeah, there's many ways to look at it for sure. But it's funny because either way you look at it, you're alone in the universe.
Alone as the universe.
Yeah, alone as the universe. Are we alone in the universe? I love that question. It's hilarious.
Exactly. Anyways, I'm going to have to cut this short, unfortunately. I do have other plans, but it's been so lovely talking to you.
Yeah.
And I hope we can do this again some other time.
Me too. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Good. Oh, you're very welcome. This has been definitely the highlight of my week.
Good. Yeah.
Well, you enjoy your evening.
You too.
Thank you.
Have a good one. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.